I hate to interrupt all this fellowship, but it's time for us to be in our class. So if you'll take your seats, we'll begin very shortly. Good morning. Thank you for your attendance today, and as this is the last class of this quarter, thank you for your attendance this quarter and appreciate your support. I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but I'm going to say it again. It's always true, I think, that the teacher learns more than the student, and it happens every time, so it's just a truism, I think, that's consistent. So I think Alan and I would say we've probably learned a lot this quarter, even though we've probably both read the book of 1 Samuel many times. When you teach it, you have to go a little deeper. And so anyway, glad to have had that experience. I'm going to begin the class with a little, this is going to be a review class for the quarter, all the way back to the full book of 1 Samuel. So we're going to do kind of a whirlwind tour of what we've studied all quarter long. But I want to begin with a map. I've had maps most every week, and there's a lot of places here that represent events in the book of 1 Samuel, and I wanted to kind of just point out a few things. First of all, this is Israel during the time of Saul, and you can see they had enemies on three sides here at least: the Philistines, the Ammonites, and the Amalekites. And I think all three of these come into the book of 1 Samuel as an enemy of Israel. We'll see that many times. We begin the quarter in Shiloh because that's where we're going to talk about later, about where Hannah was, and she prayed for Samuel, where Eli and where the Ark of the Covenant was at that time. Mizpah was a place where where Samuel gathered the people and tried to regroup them for religious purposes. Gibeah was where Saul was from. Gilgal, you remember, is where Joshua crossed the Jordan and began his campaign of eliminating the inhabitants of Israel. Ziklag is not on the map, but it's down here, is where David lived with the Philistines for a while. Gath was one of the Philistine sites that's mentioned several times. Hebron, that's where David later becomes king over Hebron, first for his first 7 years, and then his last 33 years in Jerusalem. En-Gedi, remember, was the desert area where David hid in the caves and where Saul gave him an opportunity to be killed, but David withheld his hand on that. Dan and Beersheba, we talked about, often referred to as all of Israel, meant from Dan to Beersheba. I saw one place where it said Beersheba to Dan. Typically it says Dan to Beersheba, but in one place I saw it said from Beersheba to Dan. Right up here is where the battle that at the end of the book, when Saul was killed, was in this area right here, where Jezreel, Let's see, where else? Ramah was where Samuel was from, his hometown, where also where I guess Elkanah and Hannah were from. Michmash is mentioned, Gibeah, Jebus, which later becomes Jerusalem, and Kiriath Jearim. Those are the people there that went and recovered Saul's body when he was killed and the Philistines took him away. They went and recovered his body from Kiriath Jearim. So that's kind of the area we discussed all quarter long. A lot of different sites, a lot of different events that occurred during the book. So first, the time and setting of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel was the book that kind of bridges the period of Judges to the period of Kings. And you remember that Moses led Israel originally, then Joshua, and then the period of Judges, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, and so on. They governed Israel for a long period of time, and then Samuel is the last of those judges. And so we're kind of bridging to the next, and then he's going to anoint the first king. It starts in Shiloh, and most of our events, as we said earlier, are kind of south of Shiloh. And then we've got a possible suggestion. This is not something we really talked about much in the quarter, but I thought I'd just mention it here. This is what they've kind of came up with as an estimate of when the timing of these events occurred. And you can see how they came up with some of them. The last two, David reigns over Israel, that was 38 years, and then 12 years in Hebron. 7 years in Hebrews and 33 in Israel. The death of Saul, they probably got backed into that by his age. We know how old he was and so forth. So they kind of backed into this thing all from 1105 BC at the beginning of birth of Samuel down to 970 BC when David ends his reign over Israel. So I'm going to do these in sections. This is chapters 1 through 3 that I'm going to cover here. Just some highlights. First of all, we read about Elkanah, the Levite. He was a priest. He had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. And remember, there was kind of some tension between these two wives because Peninnah had children, Hannah had not had any children, and she was very distraught about that. Peninnah picked on her because of that. And so then we came to Hannah's prayer, and she made this fervent prayer to God. Remember, Eli thought she was drunk because she was moving her lips, but he didn't hear any words coming from her. But she was actually praying. She was not drunk. And then we had the birth of Samuel and his dedication to the Lord. We think maybe he was about 3 years old when he was dedicated to the Lord, so he was very young. And then Eli and his wicked sons, Hophni and Phinehas here, his sons Hophni and Phinehas were stealing meat from the people, and they were sleeping with the wives, with women at the gates, just very evil sons. And this was a big mark against Eli, which brought forth this prophecy against the house of Eli that the priest would not come from his line anymore, and that he and his sons would be killed, and they were. So that prophecy occurred, and then it was that prophecy was told to Samuel. You remember when Samuel was in the house of the Lord, that God spoke to him and said, Samuel. And Samuel, he thought maybe Eli was calling him, and he would go back 3 times to Eli and say, yes, you called. And he'd say, no. And then the last time Eli said, next time you hear that voice, say, speak, Lord, your servant heareth. And so, because Eli kind of recognized that this must have been from God. And so, so that was his calling. From then forward, he became as kind of being mentored by Eli to some extent. And then we say all Israel, it says in there that all Israel recognized Samuel as a prophet of the Lord from Dan to Beersheba. In other words, they knew he was from God and that he was speaking for God. And so that was quite a statement that everyone recognized that already. I'm not sure at what age that was. And Samuel was a judge, the last judge. He was a prophet and a priest. He was the only person to hold all three of those positions. And so that's unique to Samuel. So some lessons from those first three chapters. One is God answers prayers. Hannah prayed and God answered her prayer. Not only did he give her Samuel, but he gave her 5 more children later. And so God answered her prayers and bonus the answer as well. And one of the things also is to give credit to God. And Hannah did. Hannah gave credit to God. And as we'll see, there are times when people do and don't in 1 Samuel give credit to God, but this was one where they did. And maybe a lesson, we are responsible for our children. Eli, that was the big thing. There may have been other things that he did that were wrong, but that was the one that was kind of pointed out in the book of 1 Samuel that he did wrong, was to not discipline his children and to teach them and to keep them from doing what they were doing in evil ways. I know there's a point where our children become adults and we have little to no control over them, but at least as long as we are able to have influence, I think we're responsible to give that influence, a positive influence. Chapters 4 through 7. So kind of a sad time for Israel. The Philistines capture the ark and destroy Shiloh. Shiloh was sort of ever since Joshua had taken the ark from Gilgal up to Shiloh, and that area, that became sort of what would later become a Jerusalem type location. This is where the house of the Lord was. This was where the ark was. And as part of the prophecy that had been given against Eli was, his children and he would die, but also that Shiloh would be destroyed. And of course, the ark being captured was significant. And as we said, Eli and his 2 sons die in this occasion. The 2 sons died from the battle, but Eli died from when the news was brought to him that the ark had been captured and that his sons had died. He fell over backwards. I don't know if he had a heart attack or what, but he died, broke his neck, and therefore that was the end of him as a judge, and Samuel took his place. The ark is returned to Israel. That was kind of an interesting thing. When the Philistines got the ark, it was one of those better be careful what you wish for, because they captured the ark, thought they did a good thing, and it started, a lot of evil things, bad things started happening wherever the ark was. You remember they put it in their temple where Dagon was, and every night Dagon would fall over on his face, and the last time he was broken. They didn't ended up wanting to try to get rid of it. Look, this ark is causing all kinds of problems. There were tumors that were growing on them. There was this plague of mice. All these things were happening because they had the ark, and so they were ready to get rid of it. And eventually, they do return it to Israel by way of some cows leading it off on a cart. And wherever it resided, typically the people prospered wherever the ark was. There was an event early on where people looked into the ark and were killed because of it, though. So these were Israelites. So Samuel takes over as judge, and he tries to bring a religious revival to Israel, if you will. He has them put away their idols. He says, you need to return to God, and he is somewhat successful at that. And he's at an event at Mizpah where he is doing this, kind of bringing people together. And the Philistines thought they were gathering for battle, and so they started to gather themselves for battle. And so they're going to attack the Israelites there at Mizpah, but Samuel and the Israelites overthrew them through God's help. God caused a panic, a loud thundering that threw them into panic, and they were easily defeated by the Israelites. So kind of an interesting chain of events there. From the time they capture the ark, Philistines are all excited and happy to, we don't like this ark anymore, let's get rid of it, to we're defeated by the Israelites. So some lessons from this section. God is angry with us when we reject him for other gods. And we talked, Isaac in his lesson today kind of talks about that. We've kind of been talking the last couple of weeks in our sermons about how there are a lot of idols we can have other than these man-made figures that the Israelites kind of worship at times. But anything that takes the place in our heart of God is an idol. And so he's angry with us when we do that. He's angry with the Israelites when they did that. But God is always anxious to forgive us if we return to him. And that's the everlasting, merciful nature of God and his love. He is always anxious to have us come back to him. And so we can be thankful for that. Chapters 8 through 10. So Israel asks for a king. God says they're not rejecting you, Samuel, they're rejecting me when they ask for a king. They think they need a king because of these enemies I told you about earlier, Philistines, Ammonites, Amalekites. They needed a military ruler to protect them from these enemies, whereas in the past, they had relied on God to protect them from their enemies. And now they're saying, I don't need God. We need to be like the other nations around us who have kings. We want a king like them. And so Samuel explains to them what it's going to mean to have a king. He's going to, hire your daughters and your sons, and you're going to have to pay taxes to him, and all these kind of things are going to be required of you for having a king. They said, we know, that's okay. We still want a king. And so the Lord tells Samuel to give them a king. That's what they asked for. We'll give it to them. And the Lord decides that Saul would be the king. And he orchestrates this meeting with he and Samuel. You remember he does it through these lost donkeys. Saul's father had some missing donkeys, and so he and a servant were going out to look for them. And God uses that occasion to lead him to Samuel, who then anoints him as king. And Saul is humble at first. We know that he changes. We know this all changes. But at first, remember, he hid among the baggage because he was kind of shy about this. He really didn't want this spotlight. And so initially, he's fairly humble. And even some of the first events that he does, he gives credit to God. But something happens to him, we'll see later. So what are some lessons from this? We should never think we know more than God. Sometimes I think, the Israelites must have thought they knew more than God. They needed this king. God didn't think they did, but they felt like they needed a king, and they thought they knew more than God, I guess, in that occasion. There's a scripture that says, my ways are greater than your ways, talking about how God's ways are beyond what we can even think about or imagine. And so we need to trust in God because he is greater, much greater than us. And then another lesson from this is that power and wealth can change us if we are not careful. We know it changed Saul, but do we sometimes get affected by wealth, by power, by position, by status of some kind, where we think maybe we're better, that we, and therefore we change from our maybe once humble position to being arrogant, which is not a godly attribute. So chapters 11, 12. Saul, with help from God, rescued the people of Jabesh Gilead from the Ammonites. And so remember, that's the enemy that's sort of to the southeast of Shiloh in Israel. At that point, Saul gives credit to God. So he's still in his maybe more humble stage. And we know that Saul was confirmed the king at Gilgal. I'm not sure why it was Gilgal. It's not far from where his home was, but for whatever reason, that's where he was sort of coronated, if you will, as king. And Gilgal was the same place where Joshua had set up, as we said earlier, his home base when he was conquering Canaan initially. And because Samuel is kind of stepping down and allowing Saul to be the ruler, if you will, of Israel, he gives a farewell speech to Israel as he steps down as judge and for Saul to become king. And in that speech, in that farewell speech, he does similar to what Joshua did with his farewell speech, what Moses did in his farewell speech. He pleads with the people to be faithful to God. And I think a noble thing for him to do, certainly what God wanted the Israelites to do, but they don't always stay faithful, as we know. So lessons. With God, all things are possible. Saul was probably outnumbered with those Ammonites, but with God, he was able to defeat. And this is I think a lesson that reappears several times in the book of 1 Samuel. With God, all things are possible. Occurs throughout the whole Bible, as a matter of fact. And then Samuel was faithful, and the people found no wrong in him, something we should all aspire to do. When he was making his speech, he kind of said, is there anything I've done wrong? Is there anything that you can find that was at fault for me? Did I steal anything? Did I do anything wrong? And the people said, no, we've not found anything wrong in you. Wouldn't that be nice if that could be said about any of us or all of us? And so something we can all aspire to. Chapters 13 and 14. So the setting is that Israel is being attacked by the Philistines, and Saul and his armies are kind of nervous, kind of worried about it a little bit. And it's time for Samuel to come and do this burnt offering, and he's not there yet. And Saul doesn't wait patiently for Samuel, but instead says, well, I'll just do it. We can't wait. The Philistines are too close. I'll take care of it. So he doesn't wait for Samuel and makes the burnt offering himself. And so Samuel, almost immediately after he does it, Samuel rebukes Saul and tells him God will take the kingdom from him. So I don't know, I think Samuel has seen something or God and Samuel have seen something in Saul here maybe it's demonstrated itself by this act of going ahead and doing something. Obviously, that was something he shouldn't have done. That was something only the priest was to do. But Saul took it in his own hands, and so the result is not good. Shortly thereafter, Jonathan goes bravely with his armor bearer and defeats some Philistines. I think he kills 20 at one time, which leads to a significant victory by Israel over the Philistines. And at the beginning of this battle, Saul had made a rash curse that no one should taste food before I have avenged my enemies. I think it's interesting to say before I have avenged my enemies. Again, you can see a shift in Saul's attitude. He is talking about these being his enemies, not the enemies of God or the enemies of Israel, but my enemies. And unfortunately, Jonathan, not knowing about his father's curse, had tasted some honey he had found. And Saul was ready to kill Jonathan because he issued this curse. If anybody that does that eats before evening, they should die. But his armies defended Jonathan and said, Jonathan did a great thing today, and God was with him. Far be it from us to punish Jonathan for this. So Saul would have killed him, except for the men who defended him. Lessons from this. To obey is better than sacrifice. That's a statement that's repeated. It's here in 1 Samuel, but it's repeated several times in the scripture. Micah, for example. And it says that it's better to obey, and Samuel uses it here in Saul's case. He didn't obey. He sacrificed, but it would have been better of him just to be obedient to God. And then secondly, a lesson, it's not always about us. Saul thought it was all upon him. Saul thought he could avenge his enemies. They were his. He had becoming more and more arrogant, and it's not always about us. And I think we can become arrogant and think things are all about us too, and they're not. We should be more humble than that. Chapters 15 and 16. So God, through Samuel, asks Saul to totally destroy the Amalekites. Remember, that's the enemy that's on the southwest side of Israel. I showed you on the map earlier. The Amalekites. So he's told, wipe them out. Now, this was a group of people that was supposed to have been destroyed much earlier if Joshua and the Israelites had finished their job of killing these people, because they were bad influence on Israel. They were evil. They had idols that God knew they would influence the Israelites with, and so he wanted them destroyed to prevent them from influencing his people, the Israelites. But Saul doesn't quite do everything he's asked to do. Saul keeps the Amalek king Agag alive and keeps the best of the spoils, the livestock and anything that was good, it says. So he didn't obey completely God's commandment. Interestingly, Saul sets up a monument for himself at Carmel, another reflection of how Saul is becoming more and more about himself, more and more arrogant. He's building a monument to himself at the end of this battle with the Amalekites. And he's very happy with himself. He's pretty proud of himself. And that's why he built a monument. But God's not so happy with him. The Lord rejects Saul as king of Israel. We'd already kind of been told with the first offense that Samuel says God's going to take the kingdom away from you. And then again, Saul rejects Saul as king of Israel. And so Samuel, I got all these S's. Samuel anoints David, the youngest of Jesse's sons. And remember how Jesse brought the oldest son first, and Samuel thought, this must be the one. You know, when he anointed Saul king, Saul looked the part. He was a head and shoulders above everybody, a strapping, good-looking man. And Samuel began to think, well, maybe this is the type of king that God wants. But then the next youngest son comes through, and he has 12 sons, and all of them come through, and none of them are the ones. And he said, don't you have any other sons living? And he said, well, there's this one out in the shepherd, the youngest, bring him in. And he was the one God wanted. And we know that God told him, well, God looks upon the heart, not like men who looks upon the appearance. So Samuel anoints David as king, although it will be many years before David actually takes the throne. But it says, from that day forward, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. We see this kind of statement before with Joshua when he was given the kingdom from Moses. Moses was also, the Spirit of the Lord was on him. And so this is a key thing. You know, we have the Spirit of the Lord in us. Maybe it's not the same, maybe it's not exactly the same way that these men did. It was more visible, but we do have the Spirit. And so we need to remember that. And in Saul's case, the Spirit departs from him. So the Spirit comes upon David, it departs from Saul. And so from that forward, you see a big difference in Saul's behavior and David's behavior as well. And Saul hires David to play the lyre when this evil spirit would come up on him. So it says that God brought this evil spirit on him, that it was something that would change his behavior, change his feeling. And so this playing of the lyre by David seemed to calm him down to some degree. So some lessons from this section. Saul has shifted from having humility to arrogance, and that can happen to us too, something we need to be careful about. And the people look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. And I think we make that mistake of looking on appearances often, sometimes too. You know, when somebody comes in, they're particularly good looking or whatever, maybe we give them a special treatment when we don't, maybe to someone who's not. But remember, it's the heart that God cares about and what matters to him. (17 through 23), a pretty big section here, but I'll hit the highlights. Of course, one of the big events early on in this passage, this section, is the big, in the Valley of Elah, David defeats Goliath, the giant. That was a big event. You remember David was sent to the battle lines where his brothers were to give them some food and other nourishing items. And he sees that this giant, this Goliath, had been taunting the Israelites for some time and taunting even against God. And David says, you know, who's this to speak this way against God? And he takes it on himself. There's a sling with some smooth stones, and it with his first shot, hits him right between the forehead and brings him down, and he's killed, and David removes his head. So a big event there, and of course gets the attention of Saul and the others in the army. Jonathan forms a friendship with David, more than just a casual friendship. This was a very close friendship that David and Jonathan had, and they loved each other. Jonathan would give his life for David, and David would give his life for Jonathan. And people start singing about David's success. They said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And this was kind of a chant or a little song that some of the Israelites were singing. And Saul becomes very angry and jealous at this. What are they saying, giving him 10,000 and me only 1,000? And he becomes very jealous of David. And Saul attempts to kill David with his spear twice. He throws the javelin or spear at David. David's able to dodge it, but he was trying to pin him to the wall, it says. But then Saul gives David his daughter Michal as for his wife. And interestingly enough, it says Saul is doing some of this maneuvering with his daughters to snare David. He says she will be a snare to him. And so that's pretty bad when a father is using his daughters as pawns in this kind of battle he has. So David marries Michal, Saul's daughter. But Saul becomes obsessed with killing David. He's got this big kingdom to run, to protect, and yet he's spending his time chasing this one young fella named David. And he travels into the deserts with his armies and everything trying to chase him. And so David is forced to flee from Saul. So he is on the run for several years after this. Again, the lesson, with God, all things are possible. When David defeats the Goliath, I don't think many people would have given him much of a chance to do that. And it wouldn't have if it was for his own strength, but it was because God was with him that he was able to defeat Goliath. And if we are going against God, it will not go well for us in the long run. I think Saul is going against God here in these events. He's going against God when he's chasing David. It's not going to be good for him in the long run, as we know. And then the last section of 1 Samuel. So David spares Saul's life twice. And each time Saul appears to be repentant, but each time he resumes his pursuit of David. And during this time, Samuel dies. It's one of the events, and of course the nation mourns his death. And then there's a little section about David, Nabal, and Abigail. And you remember Nabal was considered this worthless man who was very rich, owned a lot of cattle and sheep and so forth. David had been protecting some of his servants and property while they were there patrolling. And David needs food, and he comes to Nabal and asks for some food, and Nabal treats him very harshly. And so David's ready to come fight, so he's upset. But Abigail, Nabal's wife, thinks smartly and gathers a bunch of food together and gets it to David and says, "Please forgive my husband. Please take this food as a gift." And so he does, and so he doesn't go and pursue Nabal. But Nabal dies 10 days later after God makes his heart as stone. I don't know if that means calcification or what happened, but whatever happened, it caused Nabal's heart to be like stone, and he dies 10 days later. And of course, then David takes Abigail as his wife. Saul continues to pursue David for years. And at one point, David goes to live with the Philistines. And you remember that was down, he was in Gilgal, but the people say he needs to have a place of his own, so he goes to Ziklag, which is a little town southwest of there, still in the Philistine territory. And in the meantime, Saul, as Alan talked about last week, consults with the medium of Endor, and because God wouldn't answer him when he would ask questions, he sought this medium at Endor, and she raises up Samuel from the dead, and Samuel says, you and your sons are going to die in this battle, and God's taken the kingdom from you because you were disobedient. And while David is away from Ziklag, the Amalekites attack Ziklag, taking David's wives and his men's families with them. And so David pursues them and defeats the Amalekites and recovers his family members. And then at the very end of chapter 31, we see Saul, Jonathan, and many others killed in battle with the Philistines. You remember Saul actually fell on his own sword, but then we find later in 2 Samuel that he didn't kill him, but an Amalekite came along, and Saul asked him to kill him because he didn't want the Philistines to treat his body badly. So he killed him there on the hill. Later, the Philistines find his body, take it back with them, and then we talked about the group that came from Jabesh Gilead to rescue his body and bring it back to Israel for a burial. So, lessons from this last section. Saul obeyed God when it suited him. And the question is, do we do that sometimes? Do we obey God when it suits us, but when it doesn't suit us, maybe not so much? It's something we need to be careful about. David had patience and self-control when he had opportunities to kill Saul. Patience and self-control are fruits of the spirits in Galatians 5 that we need to have. And so whether we may not have the same kind of situation that David had as far as opportunities to kill somebody, but we still need to exercise those characteristics as fruits of the Spirit. Interesting, David consulted God often before making important decisions. You remember he would always ask for the ephod to come, for the Urim and Thummim to be used to see what God wants him to do. And he would do that often whenever there was a big important decision. We need to do the same thing. When we come across an important decision, we need to go to God and ask him for guidance, ask him for direction. And then trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understandings, Proverbs 3:5. We need to trust the Lord. He is smarter. He knows more. He's almighty, omnipotent. We need to trust in him because of that. And David faced trials with Paul when Saul pursued him. A lot of difficult times in the desert. He had 600 men with him to feed. You know, he was battling. Saul was around every corner looking for him. But one of the things that James says is this, that trials refine us. And David became probably the greatest king of Israel in terms of following God. He was a man after God's own heart. He had his mistakes. He had his errors. But God considered him as a man after his own heart. So thank you for your attention this quarter. Thank you for your staying through this to the end. And I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.